Good morning. This is Avraham Shira for Nar Shalom and the Chabura. This morning we're going to look into a small section of a large Torah of Rebbe Nachman in Tinyana 67, Samech Zion. And the title of this year, Shabbat, the name of God in the eyes of the Mikdash, is showing us an amazing connection between all these concepts. Good morning, David. How are you? I hope you're feeling well. I got your text, and I hope to be in touch with you perhaps after this year. God bless. So these four concepts, Shabbat, name of Hashem, and the eyes and the Mikdash, Rebbe Nachman amazingly weaves these ideas together to show us how they're all interrelated and interactive in a way that it's impossible to understand unless you have this mind of a tzaddik like that. And the Kabbalah behind it is also quite compelling. So we're going to begin in the 2/3 down of a very long paragraph, the second paragraph. And the words begin with Ki Shabbat Shema Dekucha Berichu. Shabbat is one of God's names. So this itself is a compelling thing. Shabbat is the name of a day of the week. And here we're being told it's also one of God's names. Now, when we go to the mikveh, for example, people don't say Shabbat Shalom in the dressing room because we consider the name Shabbat holy. Now, a name, of course, is a combination of sounds created by letters and vowels. And when we say a name, we're calling on an idea behind the name, and the idea has power. One thing that we all have to do in Kabbalah and in the learning of Kabbalah and Chassidut is to understand that an idea is not a static, dead thing on a piece of paper. An idea is a living power. And it has power in the human heart, it has power in the heart of heaven, and it spreads power in the world. And we've seen throughout history how an idea, what one idea can do. You know, the oppression of the proletariat in the 19th century created socialism, be'etzem, and communism. One idea, that these poor peasants were oppressed. And look what happened 100 years later of communism. So an idea is a living thing in the mind of man. And we have to treat it that way. It has power. If you have a good idea, it makes you feel good. If you have a bad idea, it's going to lead the wrong way. Okay, so with that said, now we understand Shabbat, if it's a name of God, it carries God's essence. So when we call on Shabbat, when we keep Shabbat, even when you say Shabbat Shalom to a friend, you are calling a higher essence into that moment. And that's a powerful thing. And that's from the Zohar and Yitro. Now, Gam Tzaddik hu bechinat Shabbat. Now, a tzaddik is also called Shabbat because the neshama of a tzaddik is purified to the level that there is no psolet, there is no chitzoniut of the weekdays. So a real tzaddik, he's not going to be attached to the weekdays too much. And he's going to be attached to this idea, an aspect of Shabbat, that when a person is totally enwrapped and enfolded in Shabbat, he's not worried about what's going to be Sunday, or even Saturday night for that matter. Shabbat is like the beginning of a new creation. And so the old week is gone and the new week is not yet to happen. So Shabbat is in between the past and the future. And it stands alone. And every Shabbat is traced back to the original Shabbat when the Jews first got the command at Har Sinai. So every time we have a Shabbat, we're tracking back to the first Shabbat. Okay. And the tzaddik, because he's purified himself from the weekdays, he's an aspect of the seventh day Shabbat. Okay. As it is written also in the Zohar, Antu Shabbat de kol yomei. You, Hashem, are the Shabbat of all the days. That in every day of the week, there is an aspect of Shabbat. This idea of rest, this idea of ceasing to work, ceasing to create and to manipulate and to change our world, but rather to dwell in what we've created. And we should see that God gave us the Shabbat. Now, if you look at the verse, it's interesting. This is from the Chumash in Shemot. See, ki Hashem natan lechem et Shabbat. Well, we already heard it. We heard it in the Torah. We heard it from Moses. What does it mean to see Shabbat? It's a day. It's an invisible thing. The concept, the idea, the power of Shabbat is invisible except for how it gets expressed into human life. So it is telling us, see. How do we see Shabbat? So the Rebbe says, Ra'u, Daika, specifically see, Ki Shabbat, Shehu Shema Dekudsha Brichu, that this Shabbat, which we said, is the name of Hashem. Hu Bechinat Koach HaRa'ut. It is also an aspect of the power of seeing. Now we're going much deeper. The Shabbat itself is drawing down power from sight itself. The power of sight. Now remember, there is an eye. You have an eye. You have two eyes, hopefully, God willing. But that eye is a piece of flesh with a lot of technology behind it. Until it gets the power of sight sent into it from the brain, it will not work. So the power of sight is a much more refined thing than the eye itself. So when we talk about sight, we're talking about the power that's driving through your eye to enable you to see. Now, in other places, the Rebbe's taught us that sight itself is the neshama beaming out of the head into the world. It's not for any reason the old cliche that the eyes are the window of the soul. All cliches are worn out, but they're still true. And I'm a person who doesn't really like to use cliches too much. But in this case, we can understand a lot that the soul itself is beaming out of your eye, and it's striking objects. And that's why when you see something, it affects your heart. Ayin ro'eh v'lev chomed. Right, the eye sees and the heart wants, because the image that goes into the eye goes straight down into the heart. And there are, I believe, some of you might correct me, but there are 32 main nerves that come out of the eyes that go to the heart. And 32, of course, is Gematria Lev. Okay. Now, this power of sight that is being drawn or is compared or connected to Shabbat, this is Bechinat Talat Gavnim De'ena Bat Ayin. This is an aspect of the three colors of the eye and the Bat Ayin, which is the pupil. Now, the three colors of the eye, there is a physical reality to that. If you look at your eye, you have white, right? The eye, and then you have a little ring around that, and then you have the iris, which is the colorful part of your eye, and then the bat ayin is the black part, which is the pupil, which is actually just a window. It's black because there's no light bulbs behind it, but if you light that light bulb behind your eye, you're going to see some things. So when we talk about the three colors of the eyes and the bat ayin, there is a physical representation in the physical eyeball, but we are also talking about Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet in Kabbalah. The Rebbe won't bring that down right here, but it corresponds, of course, to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. that these three colors are three spiritual powers, three sfirot, that are focused into that place of the eye. And the bat ayin, the daughter of the eye, which is really a window or a mirror on occasion. No. Alkein, b'chol makom shenizkar binyan beit hamikdash. Now this is very interesting connection the Rebbe makes for us. In every place that there is mentioned in the building of the Beit HaMikdash, Nizkar Shabbat. Shabbat is also mentioned. Como shekatuv, as is written in Vayikra, Et Shabbatotai tishmoru u'miktashai tira'u. My Shabbat you shall keep, and my sanctified place, my mikdash, mikdashi here really, tira'u, you will see. Again, this idea of seeing. So, but now we're talking about not seeing the Shabbat, we're talking about seeing the mikdash. So look at the pasuk. You guard my Shabbats and you will see my mikdash. So obviously there's a very deep connection between keeping Shabbat and the seeing of the mikdash, which when this pasuk was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, they had the Mishkan, which of course was the miniature mikdash that they carried through the desert for 40 years. Even though it wasn't so miniature compared to the real mikdash it was. Right? But we go forward. Therefore, in every place where we are warned, we are reminded to be careful about the works of the Mishkan. Now, the works of the Mishkan, of course, correspond to the activities that take place there for the service of God. In other words, we have sacrifices, we have grain offerings, we have wine offerings, we have holy vessels that have to be taken care of properly, we have a holy source of water that's used for cleansing the hands and the feet. And all these concepts, by the way, involve endless perushim that are wonderful to go into, each one on their own. But nonetheless, all the works of the Mishkan we are warned about. He's here mekodem al Shabbat. We're first warned about keeping Shabbat. That's strange, you know. The design of the Torah is that it warns us about Shabbat, and it warns us about working in the Mishkan. So we know that the main 39 works of that there are 39 main works in the Mishkan, actions that need to take place to keep that spiritual process going in the Mishkan. There are 39 works that have to be done. Now, 39 is the gematria Tal, and so there's a whole teaching in the Zohar about Tal itself, and the Tal, the dew. There's a spiritual dew that's connected with the light of Shabbat. And so when we keep ourselves from those works on Shabbat, we merit to the Tal Shamayim, the dew of heaven, and not the 39 works of the weekday, which is happening in the Mishkan also. So you see, again, this connection between Shabbat and Mishkan through the works. Ki Shabbat me'ir la Beit HaMikdash. Because the Shabbat is illuminating the Mikdash. In other words, there is the idea of a light, and there's the idea of the thing that's illuminated. The idea of the light is Shabbat itself. Remember, it's a time and space, but it's not a physical thing at all. But it's me'ir to the Beit HaMikdash, a building, a tent in the desert with the Israelites. So the Shabbat is sending light into the Mikdash. Ki ha-Mikdash hu gam kein bechinet einayim, because the Mikdash is also the aspect of the eyes. Now follow this closely. So if the Mikdash is the aspect of the eyes, as it is written, Ga'on uzchem, in Yehezkel, Ga'on uzchem, the power of your boldness. Mahmad enechem, which is the beloved of your eyes. Now, Ga'onuzchem, the rabbis teach us, is also a reference to the Mikdash, which is the beauty or the beloved of your eyes. That if you saw this building, it would become beloved to you instantly. Shabbat hu bechinet agavanim mi'irim b'mikdash, and we just said Shabbat is these colors, these lights, these spiritual lights that illuminate the Mikdash. Ki Shabbat hu bechinat koach hareut. So now we can remember what we just said, that there is a sight and there is something that's seen. There is an eyeball, and then there's a power from the soul that's making your eyes work. So in a very interesting way, the Rebbe is saying the Mikdash is the eye, and the Shabbat is the light going through the eye, through the Mikdash. So that's an amazing idea, that your eye itself is like a little Mikdash, and the power of sight that's flowing through it is the Shabbat itself. Shehem talat gavanim de'ena ubat ayin. And these are the three colors of the eye and the pupil, as we said. Hame'irim lebeit hamikdash, which illuminate in the mikdash bechinat einayim. So you see, these comparisons, they help us remember the ideas, right? We have the eye, and we have the power that illuminates the eye. We have the mikdash, and the power that illuminates the mikdash is Shabbat. And it's not just a metaphor. It's a parallel realm that's happening both inside a human being and in the physical world at large, essentially Jerusalem, the Mikdash, and Shabbat. And all of this together, the Rebbe says, is the idea of the mind, the power of the mind. Because to begin with, these mochin are made from God's name. God's name, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, these four-letter names that we don't say out loud as one name. That's why we say each letter with an and in between it. These four letters are the root of creation itself. Now, how that can be, how can four letters be the root of all creation? That's why we learn the Kabbalah and Torah and keep the mitzvot. Just to understand that would be a lifetime achievement. To understand how the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name of God, is the root of all creation is just an amazing thing. Okay, but this Shem Hashem, Hu Arba Otiot, it's four letters, Bechinat Arba Mochin, which corresponds to the four mental powers of the mind. Now, our mind, we know it's broken. Hopefully, it's not, but it's separate. There's two sides to the mind, the right and the left, but there's a front and back to both sides, so that makes four mochin. For those who are more familiar with Kabbalah, it's the Chochmah and Bina of Chochmah and Bina. Okay? The interweaving of the two sides of the brain. Now, these four parts of the brain correspond to Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. Okay? So the Yud and the Vav are the masculine side, and the two Ks are the feminine side, the two Heys. Bechinat v'amale oto ruach Elohim b'chochma tvuna v'odat v'chor melacha. And it says in the Torah that God said, I will fill him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all forms of work. And of course, he's speaking about Betzalel, who was the builder of the Mishkan. And so God said, I will fill him with these three powers of the mind and the ability to work with his hands. So this is a beautiful thing on the side, that there is this level where a person can be very intelligent, but he's not so good with his hands. Then there's other people who are very good with their hands, whether they're carpenters or craftsmen or artists, but they might not be so intelligent or educated, if you will, with their mind. But the goal is that the mind and the hands are working together as one. And it's an amazing thing, really, to see when you watch people work. The Gemara says there's three things people love to watch. a fire at night, the ocean, and people at work. You never notice people love to watch other people work? Well, but when you're watching somebody work, remember, it's their brain and their hands working together in unison. And the artists, the people at the highest level, like Bezalel, who built the Mishkan in the desert, there was this complete unity between their mind and their hands. And having helped and worked on building a house or two, I can tell you that it's not easy. It's not easy to have this unification of the mind and the hands. But Bezalel had it because God blessed him to fill him with the Spirit of God. And he calls it here, interesting, also, Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, who is at the level of Elohim, which we've learned before, is that Elohim is God when he sits in the chair of judgment, right? Each time God is in a different position, we give him a different name. When he's a creator, he's called Havaya. When he's a judge, he's called Elohim. When he's a master of forces, he's called Elokim Tzivaot, right? The master of the hosts. So this is a very important thing to understand why God has so many different names, because each name corresponds to a different thing that Hashem does in the world. Okay. Now, Chochma, Tvuna, Adat, V'kol Melacha, these three powers of the mind and knowing how to work. Zebechinat arba mochin, he says the idea again, the four aspects of the brain. Shehem nasim b'bechinat shem Hashem, which are made, drawn out of the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Como shekatuv ra'u ki kara Hashem b'shem Betzalel. See, again this idea of seeing. Ki kara Hashem b'shem Betzalel, God called in the name of Betzalel, v'maleoto. And God filled him with the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, b'chokma tvuna and da'at. V'achar kach, after the Torah says this about Betzalel, it goes on to say, Na'aseh b'china talat gavanim de'ena ubat ayin. We create the aspect of the three colors of the eye and the pupil, the daughter of the eye, which is really the soul itself emanating through that little window in your eye, is called the bat ayin, the daughter of the eye. Now, the eye is a thing, but what is born out of the eye, just like a baby is born from her mother, what is born out of your eye is sight itself, which is, of course, your neshama spreading into the world. The achar kach arba'a yisodot, and then afterwards, the Rebbe refers back to a previous concept in this Torah about the four foundations. And the four foundations is a separate teaching on its own that we need to learn over, in the course of our efforts. But we're not going to go there today. But it creates for us this total picture of how Hashem, who is the root of all creation, has a name. One of his names is Shabbat. So think of it like a progression. God is giving power to Shabbat. Shabbat is giving power to the Mikdash. And the Mikdash is giving us power to know and see God. Right? It's a progression that is obviously very complex, but we try to simplify it so we can get a handle on it. Right? Hashem fills his name, which is Shabbat. Shabbat fills the eye with the power of sight to do what? To see the Mikdash. And so a lot of people in the world don't really think that building the third temple is such an important thing compared to all the other important things there are in the world. But there's a statement by the Gemara from the rabbis, the sages, who remember they gave their lives for these words. And it says, if the nations of the world knew what we lost and what they lost with the Mikdash, they would mourn for the Mikdash more than the Jews. Now that's an outrageous statement, in my opinion. That if the nations knew what was lost when the Mikdash was destroyed, they would mourn more than the Jews. Now why that is of course up for interpretation, and there are different interpretations of that. But when we understand what the Mikdash is and why when we see it through the power of Shabbat, through the name of Hashem, when we see that Mikdash, we see the idea of atonement and coming back to Hashem and reuniting with our Creator, which is really what we're here to do in order to make this world the Garden of Eden that it's supposed to be, that it was in the beginning. And so I want to bless everyone to come back to Hashem, come back to the name of Shabbat, come back to the idea of rest, to turn off our phones and turn off our TVs and turn off our radio, everything, and just turn on the mind to Hashem. So God bless all of you. You should have a good Shabbat, a holy day of rest and peace, being with your family, talking to your family, sharing ideas, and all of a sudden the whole week changes when you have that type of Shabbat. So God bless all of you. We'll see you next week on Sunday, Bezrat Hashem, at 11:45 live. And remember, if anybody has any questions, they can write to us on Facebook. We have movies, classes on our YouTube channel, and we have services provided for people who need them, yard site, saying Kaddish for people, learning for people. In other words, spreading this great blessing that God has given us. So Shabbat Shalom to all of you, and we'll see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.